Hello everyone, I'm Happy Caldwell and welcome to Arkansas Alive. All this week we're talking about investing for the future, but today we're going to talk about generational poverty. You know, you might be a victim of generational poverty and don't even know it. So stay tuned. You know, I was a victim of generational poverty, but I didn't know it until I got saved and filled with the Holy Spirit and began to study the Word of God. I know when I was a kid, I asked my mother, I said, Mama, are we poor? Because we didn't have a refrigerator, we didn't have any of the things that other people had. This was during the war, World War II. She said, no, Bubba, we're not poor. I said, why not? She says, because we have love. Oh, Mama was a great encourager. But when we ran out of milk, before the milk bottle was totally empty, she'd go over to the hydrant and she'd run some water in it and swish it around and make us think we had milk. It was what we'd call self-induced skim milk. It had a little bit of milk in there, but I thought we were poor, and I wanted to know why we didn't have the things that we, of course, Daddy's overseas in the war, and we're living with her mother and father. A lot of people did that during the war years. That when Daddy came home, Daddy he hit the pavement running. He was working 2 jobs, one in the daytime, one at night. Didn't have a car. We didn't have anything. He was riding the streetcar or riding the bus, and he eventually began to prosper. But he was raised during the Great Depression. His father taught him poverty, modeled him poverty, even though he didn't know what he was doing. And my father modeled it to me. And I grew up with it, and I had to get delivered from generational poverty. Now, I've already defined poverty for you yesterday. It's deficiency, it's lack, it's need. It also means to occupy by driving out or to seize and possess what doesn't belong to you. That's what Satan does. He comes to steal, kill, and to destroy. But Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. So, generational poverty is defined as having been in poverty for at least 2 generations. And my family qualified. My grandfather's generation and my father's generation. And it was getting ready to go on down and pass to me. But I got saved and I got delivered. I got delivered of a spirit of poverty, a poverty mindset. I had it cast out of me. You understand what I'm saying? And we'll talk about that. Poverty is under the curse. Poverty is not a blessing. It's under the curse of the law. And we'll read about it in Deuteronomy 28. Generational poverty, 2 generations, successive generations. Poverty is relative. Everyone around you has a similar belief and circumstances. Let me just give you some good advice. This is not meant to be offensive or critical. If you're always hanging with people that are in the same boat you are, you're so poor you can't pay attention, you're always talking about lack and want. If the conversation begins to wane over to what you're doing without, how you're suffering, you can't afford this, why prices are so high, you need to get away from those people. You need to find another group of friends. You need to find someone that will build you up, someone that is prospering at a different level than you are. You've probably heard me tell this story many times when God called Jeannie and I to build VTN. Actually, it started earlier than that. It started when he called us to build our church. And he said, I want you to build it and pay for it as you go. I don't want you to borrow the money. Well, in 1979, interest rates were 18%. And God's a good businessman, and we didn't borrow the money. He didn't tell me it'd be a sin, but he said, I don't want you to. I want you to pay for it as you go. So we did. I had to have a revelation from God that we could do that, and I got it. Fellowship with God, and I finally realized, yes, we can do this because God said to do it. But he had to train me, and he had to get me out of my poverty way of thinking. So the first thing he told me to do was to go buy a suit of clothes and pay full price for a suit of clothes. In fact, he said, I want you to go buy the most expensive suit you can find. Well, I didn't see the relevancy in that, and I asked him about it. I said, I don't understand why I have to do this, because back in the 70s, we were buying our clothes at outlet malls and manufacturing outlets and Berry Manufacturing, and double knit was the going thing. And, double knit, the lapels were out to here, and if you get a runner in your pants leg, it's like a woman's hose. It just goes on down to the bottom. But you could buy 3 suits for $79.95. Three suits for $79.95 at Berry Manufacturing. And the Lord told me to go pay for the highest price suit in the city. Well, I didn't know where to find it in the first place. And so I went to Dillard's. And I found Hart, Schaffner, and Marks. It was $300, $350, I think. I thought, oh, my Lord, what's the sense in this? I can buy 5 suits for $350. I said, Lord, I don't understand. What's the point? He said, if you can't pay full price for a suit, you can't build a building. And if you can't build a building, I have to get somebody else, because I've called you to build this ministry. Well, then I began to see, and he said, and furthermore, when you go out to eat, you shop down the right-hand side of the menu instead of the left. He said the right-hand side of the menu is where the price is. You don't eat food, you eat price. And I was so guilty, and I felt so ashamed, and I repented to the Lord, and I said, you're exactly right. Well, of course he is. And he said, when you go shop, you buy the cheapest thing there is, whether you want it or not. You pay the less, you pay the least, you get the smallest amount. You're always leaning towards the least, the smallest, everything. He said, I want you to start thinking differently. Now, don't forget the purpose. The purpose was so I could build a building to house the church. In the Bible, it tells you the purpose for wealth is to establish God's covenant. I think sometimes we forget that. We start out with needs like food and clothing and shelter. And before you know it, when we start getting those things, we forget that that's just entry level. That's just the basics. God doesn't want us to stay there and live there. He wants us to go on. He wants us to grow. He wants us to expand. He wants us to provide life abundantly. And it's not all for us. It's so we can establish His covenant. I want to stop here right now. And I did find that suit, and I did buy that suit. And I started shopping down the left-hand side of the menu, eating the food that I wanted instead of the price I could afford. I want to stop and make a little side trip here, talking about purpose, talking about life and life more abundantly, getting out of generational poverty, always having a lack mentality, a need mentality, a less mentality, and getting out of the groups that you're in. That's all they talk about. They go to the cheapest, they buy the cheapest, they wear the cheapest, they eat the cheapest, and they talk poverty all the time. And they draw comfort from that because, you don't want to feel ostracized by your friends, so you tend to fit right into that poverty mindset. I was doing some perusing the other day, and I was actually listening to some music. I had seen a program about copying Beethoven, Ludwig van Beethoven, who was a great composer in his day. And I was interested in the fact that, and I had to study all this when I was in school and in college. And my mother, being a professional ballet dancer in her 20s, she played all this kind of music in our home when I was growing up. I mean, it was nothing for me to come into the house, and she'd be in the living room. She'd pulled back the rug, and she had her records on the hi-fi, and she was playing all of this stuff. I mean, Strauss and Rachmaninoff and Beethoven and Chopin and all this, and she was dancing. She was a beautiful, gorgeous, talented ballerina, and she was doing Swan Lake in New York when the war broke out. She and my dad eloped and got married. But my mother loved to dance, and she was good at it. And so I was listening to this program about Beethoven, and I read where I noticed that his health had failed him. He died in his 50s, and his health had failed him, so he hired a young woman to copy. He would tell her what he was feeling in music, and he would tell her, now you start with this key, and then you go to this key, and then fortissimo, and then you come down, and blah, and she'd write it all down. So he was coming up with it out of his spirit and his brain, but she was writing it down and composing it all until he died. And he did get so ill that he died. I think he was about 57, 58 years old. Anyway, I was listening to this music, the compositions, the music was awesome. And then I started going back and listening to some of this other music, Schubert and Strauss and so forth. And then these movie themes came up. The theme to Dr. Zhivago, Laura's theme, and then the theme to Schindler's List, and then the theme and I just began to listen to each one, because I've got to understand, my mother being raised in that profession of dance and music, I heard all this stuff all the time because she played it at home. And so it wasn't foreign to me because I knew it and she taught it to me and so forth. So I pulled up Schindler's List music, the theme to Schindler's List, beautiful music. And then all of a sudden they had a trailer there from Schindler's List, the movie. And in the trailer, and I had it, I'd love to show it to you. If you saw the movie, you've seen it, but because of copyrights and stuff, we can't do that without permission. But in the end of the movie, when Germany had surrendered and the end of the war had come, Oskar Schindler, he was a German, and he was a German industrialist, a factory, but he hired Jewish workers to work for him. He saved 1,200 people from extermination by hiring them to work in his factories. Now, he was a Nazi sympathizer, but he didn't like them because they were killing Jews, and he didn't like that. He was raised Catholic, is what the biography said. He just had compassion. He didn't really know what he was doing or why he was doing it. But he saved 1,200 Jewish lives by having them work in his factory. It was because it was cheaper to hire Jews because they were prisoners than it was to hire Polish people. So he hired the Jews, and the Nazis let him do it. You know, he bribed the Nazis and so forth. To make a long story short, when he was leaving the factory, and the war was over, and these Jewish people were all free now, he looked at his accountant, actually the man that ran his business, and he was in tears. And he said, I could have saved one more. I could have saved one more. And he just broke down and began to weep. Now, I realize this is Hollywood, and they're recreating a true story. This is a true story. Oskar Schindler was a real person, and he did exactly what the movie portrayed. And he began to weep, and he said, I could have sold my car. I could have saved 10 more people with the money I got from that car. He said, I wasted so much money. I could have saved so many more. And his accountant, the man that ran his business, said, Mr. Schindler, he said, you've saved 1,200 Jewish people today. And he said, you've saved a whole generation. Are you listening to me? You've saved a whole generation here by saving these 1,200 Jewish people. But nevertheless, Oskar Schindler kept saying, I could have saved one more. I could have saved one more. What was he doing? He was speaking to purpose. He was a prosperous, wealthy businessman. Now, he afterwards was arrested. He was arrested several times. He went broke. He started new businesses. He moved to different countries, but he always went broke. He was being used by God to save a whole generation of people. The purpose for his wealth, this is what I'm getting to, the whole purpose of his wealth was not for him. It was for them. It was for the Jewish people. Today, you can go to Mount Zion, Jerusalem, Israel, and you can see Oskar Schindler's grave, his headstone. Can you imagine? He's the only Nazi that is buried on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, Israel. That's got to be a miracle. But it's because the Jewish people loved him so much because of what he did for them. And nobody really ever knew why he did it. They supposed that because he was Catholic, because he was sympathetic to the Jewish, plight and what was happening to him. He watched them being killed and shot by the Nazis, and he just wanted to save them. He wanted to help them, which he did. The whole purpose of Oskar Schindler's life was to save Jewish lives. And he did it with his own money, bankrupting his business to save their lives. That's the end result. Go to Deuteronomy 8:18. Listen to it. Anytime you start getting caught up in self-aggrandizement and, you're just forgetting the purpose, Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17. You say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand hath gotten me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord thy God, for it is He that giveth thee power to get wealth. God gives you power to get wealth. God gave man the mindset, the wisdom to know the difference between dirt and gold. I mean, if it wasn't for God, man wouldn't have known how to make money to get wealthy. But here's the purpose: that He may establish His covenant. That's the whole purpose of getting out of poverty, getting out of generational poverty. I had to break through that. I had to realize, of course, you start where you are. Jeannie and I started with being able to feed our family, clothe our family. We started with being able to buy groceries to live. That's where you start. You start with where you are right now, but you don't stay where you are right now. We began to realize that God wanted us to prosper, not for our sake so much, but for others' sake. He wanted us to be able to do what we're doing now with VTN. In, 1987, 86 or 87, I had been seated by Lester Sumrall to purchase UHF television stations. They were for sale, all across the country because nobody wanted them. And so I found one in the back of a broadcast magazine down in El Dorado, a construction permit. So I flew down there and sat in the man's truck and offered him 50 cents on the dollar and bought the permit. All you got was a piece of paper. I also got 26 acres of land down in England to put the tower up. And then we acquired another station in Hot Springs. The gentleman that rebuilt Bathhouse Row, he and his wife got a divorce, and she got a television station, Hot Springs, our Hot Springs station, in the divorce settlement. So I went down there and made them an offer and bought that. And then in Jonesboro, we went up there and found another station and bought that. So we began to build the Victory Television Network. And that's who we are. That name is copyrighted. That's what we have done. And we put the first station, Little Rock Pine Bluff Station, on December 25th, 1988. We dedicated it to the Lord on Christmas Day, 1988. Now, that was the goal, that was the purpose of teaching me prosperity and delivering me from a poverty mindset, because I could have never done that because television wrote the book on expensive. I mean, it's expensive. And our electric bill's $30,000 a month. I mean, you got to have money to do these things. Well, God has to use people. And He used people to help us to build the network and to keep it going today. And it continues to grow. Roku, live stream. We're covering 14 nations in all 50 states every day. And God had to get me out of the poverty mindset so I could get over and start thinking higher. But I had to always remember, He didn't do this for me. He did it for you. He told me, He said, that television screen is my window that I can pour myself out into the homes, hospital rooms, hotels of the people of Arkansas and around the world now, in Missouri and Tennessee and Mississippi and throughout the states and through live stream and Roku around the world. He said that was the purpose of it. It's His network, and He supplied the money through you, people out there, our partners that sustain this network on a monthly basis. But the whole purpose of it was to establish His covenant. And what I'm talking to you about today and this week is about covenant. It's about the covenant that He cut with us, first through Abraham and then through Christ. Through Christ, we're Abraham's seed, and then heirs according to the promise. The inheritance that Abraham was promised through God was to be heir of the world. And this covenant that He gives us the power to get wealth is to establish His covenant in the earth. And that's what we're doing. We do it by teaching. We do it by broadcasting. And we're delivered from generational poverty. So if you're fellowshipping with people that are always talking poverty, always talking lack, always talking least, then love them, but get a new bunch of friends that will talk prosperity, that will talk abundance, that will talk to you about increasing, because that's what God wants. Poverty is no respecter of persons. All races, all genders, all nations. Ignorance and poverty are related. Ignorance and poverty are related. Poverty is profitable. You can make money off of poverty. You can show enough poverty that you can touch the hearts of people that want to give. So you have to be honest and wise as how you present the need. You also have to realize and eventually get to the point where you don't succumb to using poverty to raise money. There's a fine line there. If you're fulfilling a need, if you're helping people, that's one thing. But if you get off into, okay, and I know ministries that have done this, they create the need to raise money. I know because there are financial advisors that advise television ministries, and they say what you need is a purpose, is a call, is a cause. You need to go out and shoot some pictures of some poor people and start raising money and start helping. Well, that can be a trap. You can get off into using the poverty. An individual brings with them the rules of the class in which they were raised. Now, this is not designed to offend or criticize or downgrade, but you bring with you the rules of the class you were raised in. If you're not careful, you'll begin to think about prosperity and poverty according to the way you were raised, your parents, grandparents, their friends, and you will take on their attitudes, and you will take on their feelings toward things. You will either be angry. Have you ever wondered, another little side trip here, we got a couple of minutes. Have you ever wondered, and I'm going to read this in the scriptures, have you ever wondered why disasters, tornadoes, hurricanes, generally speaking, not always, there are exceptions, always hit and destroy the poorest areas of town. They seem to always destroy. If a tornado comes and it goes through a city or a town, it's always the poorest of the people. Hurricanes, I've watched the interviews. It's always the poorest of the people that are destroyed by that perverted weather. The tornado, the earthquake, the hurricane. Because poverty is a spirit, and it is manipulated by Satan and demon spirits. And they're always drawn to the poverty spirit. You don't see many high scrapers destroyed. You see the trailer parks. You see the poor people. You see the people living right on the beach or the lake. They're the ones that are hit the hardest. Have you ever wondered about that? Well, the Scripture tells us, if you turn over with me, and I'm running out of time, and let me find, here it is. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, but the destruction of the poor is their poverty. Poverty draws a spirit of poverty. If you have a poverty mindset, now we just talked about generational poverty. We're going to talk about situational poverty, which has happened to a lot of people here recently. But the demon spirits that are killing, stealing, destroying, the destruction of the poor is their poverty. They don't ever expect to have anything. They don't ever expect to get out of the situation they're in. They're locked into this generational poverty. There's only one way to get out of that. And the Bible tells us how in Luke 4:18. And we'll deal with this too. Jesus preached the gospel to the poor. He was anointed to preach the gospel to the poor. And that's how you get out of the generational poverty, is you have to hear the gospel. You have to have the gospel preached to you. So don't ever resist the preaching of the gospel of prosperity if you want to get out of poverty. Join me for tomorrow's Arkansas Live. And remember, Jesus is Lord of Arkansas and where you're watching too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on Twitter at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.